and welcome to NAIOP Colorado's virtual property tour and case study series featuring NAIOP's 2020 Community Impact Award honoree, the Quail, developed by Zocalo Community Development. My name is Sarah Crute. I'm a client manager with Chase Commercial Term Lending, a NAIOP Colorado board member, and chair of the NAIOP Programs Committee. Today's program will include an interactive discussion with key members of Zocalo and their development and finance team, ranging in topics from site selection, financing, and unique design elements to complexities around affordable housing development. We have a few announcements and event reminders before we begin. First, a thank you to our series sponsors, our sustaining sponsor, Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, our supporting sponsors, Newmark, Alcorn Construction, and Interior Environments, and our featured project partner today, Zocalo Community Development. I'd also like to thank the NAIOP Programs Committee members for their work organizing this virtual property and case study series. Audience members are encouraged to submit questions for the panel using the Q&A function from their Zoom toolbar, and links to the speaker bios are available on the NAIOP website, and a reminder that today's program will run until 10:30. And now, please welcome today's panelists, who will be introduced here shortly, and our special guest moderator, Terrance Hunt, Vice Chairman, Multifamily Capital Markets at Newmark. Terrance, kick us off.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone at NAIOP that helped put this together alongside you. You guys do a fantastic job. Like you stated, my name is Terrance Hunt. I'm with Newmark and specialize in multifamily brokerage. Been doing it 25 plus years, I guess. I'm starting to lose count. Anyway, let's talk about this really exciting project here and the Quail. So this is NAIOP's 2020 Community Impact Award recipient, as mentioned. Now, what does that mean? Now, NAIOP Community Impact Award recognizes projects that provide positive impact to the community, which address things like affordable housing, workforce housing, sustainability, and really strengthen our neighborhoods. The Quail really represents this. This is a unique redevelopment of a historic building. It was an old hotel on First Avenue and Broadway. Many of you, if you've been down Broadway, you know it, you've seen it. It took significant coordination to really transform this property, and it included work by not only DURA, the city of Denver, CHFA, with close alliance. You had to get the buy-in from the neighborhoods, which aren't always easy, like Baker and West Wash Park, to deliver the successful project that provides affordable living options and really is just crucial to Denver. And it's just a great example how you can use real estate for good, taking this building that was a bit dilapidated before this group got involved. So first off, let me just introduce our panelists. We've got a real exciting lineup today, and I'll have each of them just give a brief description of what their role is, what their group does, the company they work for does, and how they participated in this project briefly, and then we'll get into the weeds and in depth here later. So I'm going to start with first David Zucker, who was the principal and really the one behind getting this off the ground. So David, give us a brief background of yourself and your company and your role.
Thanks, Terrance. Thanks to NAIOP for recognizing the impact of that community development can have, which I think is really cool. So thank you for that. As Terrance perhaps would say in shorthand, Zocalo pulled the short straw and got to redevelop this beautiful, important asset. Zocalo is a vertically integrated developer, self-performing general contractor and manager. We build both market rate as well as affordable and integration of both mixed use, mixed income projects.
Great. Okay, let's move on to Kathryn Grosskop, who is with Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, better known as CHFA.
Yeah, thank you, Terrance, and good morning, everyone. Kathryn Grosscup, manager of the Housing Tax Credit Program at CHFA. Briefly, CHFA is a 45-plus-year-old organization We're quasi-governmental, so we stand separate from state government, but we are authorized under state charter to carry out our mission, which is to strengthen Colorado by investing in housing and community development. The tax credit program is one of the most fundamental ways to do acquisition, rehab, or new construction of affordable housing. So I'm excited to share how we were a partner in the Quail. Thank you.
Great. And let's move on to the Denver Urban Renewal Authority and Executive Director, Tracy Huggins.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Naop, for giving us the opportunity to talk about this exciting project and the different roles that each of us played in helping to bring it forward. I am the Executive Director of the Denver Urban Renewal Authority, and our goal, not only in this project, but in our work across the city, is to help eliminate blighting conditions that can have a negative impact on a neighborhood through the ability to provide public finance to private development. We do that through a tool referred to as tax increment financing that allows us to capture the newly generated property and sales tax to help defray certain costs related to the project. We can talk a little bit more about how that worked in the overall capital stack, but we were very proud to be a participant and playing a small but important role in bringing this project forward.
Yes, thank you, Tracy. And blight, yes, that could even be an understatement when we looked at this project before. John Lucero, founder and principal broker at Lucero Development Services. John, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you were involved.
Yeah, I've been a broker and involved in development for over 30 years now. However, I did spend a bit of time working in Denver in the Office of Economic Development and oversaw workforce and housing amongst other divisions. So we work with private developers and nonprofit developers in building affordable housing and workforce projects. So a lot of economic development drivers. And I was involved in this one from acquisition and still working on monetizing some of the credits today.
And Brad Weinig, Brad, you have one of the best titles, Director of Catalytic Partnership, the City and County of Denver. Love to hear about your role there and how your group was involved with, how the city was involved in this.
Sure. Thanks, Terrance. And good morning, everybody. Again, Brad Weinig, City and County of Denver, Department of Housing Stability, or HOST for short. I've actually been in this role all of 2 weeks, so I'm not even 100% sure what the title means, but effectively our department within the city is responsible for investing local and federal resources into programs, developments, policy tools, all in an effort to ensure that we're creating housing affordability opportunities across the entire spectrum, from folks who are without a home, homeless, all the way up to kind of affordable home ownership programs. And my specific role is really kind of navigating around both the policy tools and the negotiations with developers like David on market rate developments to ensure that there's some element of affordability if at all possible. And in this particular case, the city of Denver made a loan to David in this partnership to help this project come to fruition.
Great. Thank you, Brad. All right, so here's our format. Obviously, things are a little different, but NAIOP's been successful with these online virtual property tours and case studies. This is one where we can learn a lot because of the complexities. What we're going to do is we're going to have an open format. So we're going to do just some question and answers, have our panelists go back and forth, and we'll guide that conversation to really tell the story of how this came about. We're going to follow that with question and answer from the audience, so you can chime in via the chat function. And then audience members, you send those throughout, and we'll address them when we can. If not, we'll address them at the end when I'm talking about those questions. So, and then panelists. So when you want a slide, just call it out, and we have the technical people in the background that will put that slide on for you to help describe what we're talking about. So without any further ado, let's jump into a couple questions. And now the solution that we've been talking about for years is what can we do about affordable housing? And There's obviously a need for affordable housing in Denver. Denver's values have been continuing to escalate. I mean, we're seeing average single family home prices now in the 680s. I saw last night on the latest news release, with condos pushing over 500, and then the for rent is, continuing to escalate, especially over the last 5 to 7 years. So I'd like to get each of the panelists to discuss the challenges we face as they see it when trying to create solutions to bring affordable housing to our city. So with that being said, let me start with Kathryn at CHFA. You've been CHFA's been instrumental in bringing affordable housing to our community. So I'd love to hear what your take is of where we are today.
Sure. Well, obviously, affordable housing is just a ginormous topic, so it's going to be hard in the space we have today to really cover everything that involves with it. And I think today we're focusing primarily on rental challenges with affordable housing. The role that CHFA plays is that we are the allocating agency for the state for low-income housing tax credits and also the state affordable housing tax credit program. So we have quite a lot of work that we do every year to bring to fruition lots of affordable housing projects statewide. So in 2020, CHFA was able to support just under 3,200 affordable rental units statewide. Looking at our portfolio, just as an example, in our history of about 48 years, we have 60,000 units in our portfolio statewide, about 730 developments. And in Denver, the Denver metro area has about 70% of all of those units and developments. As you said, Terrance, it's really getting challenging. The average rent, I was trying to look for something. I have a Q2 data point for Denver metro, about $1,400 for an average rent. And so when we're talking about the affordable space, we know that something like 51% of all renters are cost burdened, meaning that they pay more than 30% of their income toward rent. So we're dealing with a very large challenge in the Denver metro area as well as across our state to see what we can do to bring more supply and push down rents for all of our customers. In this development, the rents are, and David can confirm, but I think in the one bedrooms, there's somewhere around 1,000, 1,050, or maybe 1,100. So you can see that ability to provide a lower rent really creates a wonderful opportunity for lots of clients in Denver, which is part of the success to this project. CHFA's average household that rents in one of the buildings that we support earns about $22,000 a year. So we're really targeting a segment of our rental population that needs a lot of units. The Quayle, and we can get into this more, but I think it really was a fantastic example of a very complicated project. It is sort of affordable housing at its best. It brought together preservation, wonderful partnership of a lot of players, and a very sophisticated and successful developer that was really the linchpin to make this project happen.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's good insight. Tracy, how about you? I know Denver Urban Renewal Authority's involved in all kinds of projects, but in terms of affordable housing, what's your take on it, where we're at? I think you're on mute, Tracy, if you could unmute.
Of course I am. So DURA has been involved in supporting the delivery of affordable housing for quite a very long time, and very frequently through a combination of not only supporting those projects that provide affordable housing, but those buildings are also historic in nature. And so being able to blend the adaptive reuse with the delivery of affordable housing is something we have been focused on for decades. We have a number of projects right in the heart of downtown that really were really important in helping to provide an opportunity for downtown to be a neighborhood, to deliver housing opportunities downtown with a specific focus on workforce housing. This project is really similar in that regard, in that, again, it took those components of the historic building with the expected outcome of delivering the affordable units, and realize that this is right up our alley when it comes to a mission standpoint. That being said, you'll notice here that many of us are all about the money on this. And when we try to bring together these varying financing sources, we recognize pretty quickly that it's a tricky trap to run, because they each have their own requirements. From a broader standpoint, some of the challenges that we see in delivering affordable housing is the community push and pull against the development push and pull, where we're wanting to see these projects deliver larger units with deeper levels of affordability, recognizing the basics of a plan of finance. You need to have rental income to be able to come in to support the units. To the extent you are tamping down that rental opportunity and having an increased cost with the unit size, you immediately are recognizing that you're going to need all of these different sources to bring it together. Sprinkled in on top of that, the challenges unique to redeveloping historic properties. And you can imagine pretty quickly why it is there aren't that many folks who are lining up to be able to undertake these projects. So really thrilled that we could find a way to be able to navigate that process. Really excited that there are developers like Zocalo who are willing to undertake all of the challenges that come along with it, so that we can deliver an asset to the community in a way that emphasizes the environmental sustainability through the adaptive reuse, as well as hitting that really critical community need of delivering affordable housing.
Great, Tracy. Thank you. John, let's go to you. You're a veteran in this arena. We know it's not getting any easier here with escalating pricing, as we've heard. So
you hit it right on the hit the nail on the head with that, Terrance. Land values in Denver Metro, specifically in Denver, have gotten through the ceiling, as everybody who's participating in the panel and who's attending knows. So one of the ways to get to reducing that base is through adaptive reuse of existing buildings. But then we also have, working with Denver and overseeing the housing department. I worked with Tracy and Brad during those years, and also with David. We found that, the land values are tough, but in the private sector working through this, just the fees alone and the time to get through the processing, it really puts a challenge on a project, whether it's adaptive reuse or starting from the ground up. So getting through the entitlements and phases is really expensive, takes quite a while. And then you have to have a patient ownership to get through that. But the other thing in the background, when you announce to the communities that you're going to be building affordable housing, there's still a stigma. Not only NIMBYism, but people are afraid that it's going to drive down their land values. And you hear those people. And I was working with a different developer last week, and we had 3 or 4 people attending that public meeting, and concerned their values would go down, and that they didn't feel that the project would deliver the community members that they wanted to join the neighborhood. So it's really a lot of different things going back and forth, but you really have to be nimble and creative in putting these together. You'll see later on the capital stack that we had to put together on this one was really complex, and we had to do that to make up for the land value and the processes to deliver. So.
All right. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Brad, city and county, here you are, 2 weeks. You're here about to solve some problems. Glad to have you aboard. Obviously, being in one of the thriving cities here in the US, it brings with it a lot of great things, but also problems come along when you look at serving a population of well over 3 million people now and making sure everyone can afford to live here.
Yeah, well said. And again, it's great to be part of this group. Kathryn did a great job of laying out, I think, overall the need. It certainly is statewide. There are definitely elements that are, particularly unique or challenging in a place like Denver that is kind of geographically constrained and also very vibrant as an economy. And I think we have a tendency to talk in kind of impersonal terms like units and AMI and incomes and rents. But at the end of the day, the city and county of Denver really believes this is ultimately about our residents and our people. And when people have access to a stable home that they can afford, and it's certainly exacerbated in what we're currently going through with the pandemic, that you're better able to just succeed in life. You're better able to connect to other resources and people, find and keep jobs, succeed in school, address physical and mental health issues, and possibly even save up some funds. And when the less affordable housing becomes, the less money flows into our local economy. Economic growth slows because our employers can't find workers who can afford to live here. Traffic and becomes congested. Infrastructure becomes taxed as people have to kind of commute further away to find places they can afford. And so, we need to continue to invest in projects like the Quail, and also think through kind of how we, invest in programs and policies to make sure that we can, do more of these and do them faster.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Brad. All right. Well, so let's now jump into discussing the property itself and then how this whole plan evolved. Affordable housing, as all of you mentioned, is an issue, and in growing cities like Denver, and I've done these things in the Bay Area and so forth. It is a major problem in the US, and it's not easy to solve. So good to have a panel who came together and did solve the problem of affordable housing with this community. But let's look at what this community was when they approached it. And it's pretty amazing that this unique 112-year-old hotel, which sits on Broadway, First and Broadway, very prominent location, which you don't want to see something just sitting there and rotting away. This property was condemned. It was in need of major updates to bring this to today's standards where it could be used for commercial or residential. And, other than the potential of this historic facade the property has, it itself was completely dilapidated, deemed as unfit to be occupied, even infested with, rodents, so forth. Many different groups took a run at this property. I mean, I think it was dropped 4 or 5 times where people saw the potential of the location and the facade, and no one could figure it out. They all came to the same conclusion. They could not find anything that would work. So David came along. And so you take the difficulties and complexities to produce affordable housing in our city, and then what I just mentioned, the difficulties and complexities of the property that multiple groups dropped because they couldn't figure it out. So David, you decide to marry these two difficult situations together in one project. So first off, the very obvious question is, what the heck's wrong with you? Why would you take this on? You're a successful market rate developer. Why would you do this? Then we're interested to see how this plan evolved and the initial process of getting this off the ground. I mean, you're putting together commercial use with residential use, renovation of a historic building, and new construction. So tell me, what are the first major challenges? What was the plan really, David, going forward when you saw this? What did you see that other people didn't?
Well, thanks. First of all, there's such great build-up, lead-in by Tracy, Kathryn, Brad, and John. What we saw, and I'll say, which is probably not something, these two words go together very often. We feel, though, as if we're a developer of a conscience, and recognizing the juxtaposition of a whole bunch of things at this site was that it was a beautiful building, dilapidated. It had public realm corrosion. It could have been, it would be, if renovated, just a jewel of this part of Denver. In fact, it was really the center of one of the predecessor cities, ultimately South Denver, it was called, back in the early part of last century. That was the thriving little city on its own, soon to be absorbed by Denver. It could be brought back to that. And so we felt as if we were problem solvers. And I often say about Zocalo and me that we're a glorified order taker. In some ways, being responsive, we like the challenges of figuring out how to create an opportunity for the community, for preservation, for engaging to achieve that, a whole bunch of friends and a whole bunch of friendly agencies. And so what we really started thinking about was, what are the needs? And the first discussion really outside of our group was with the Baker neighborhood, West Washington Park neighborhoods. And Baker neighborhood truly is one of the best residential R&O experiences that I've had. And we always put a lot of effort, and John and I spent a lot of time focusing on communication to ensure that the neighborhood didn't think we were foisting anything on them. And so Baker responded. And so as we talked about some of the things that the neighborhood was concerned about, some of the things that they talked about that then had echoes in the development process was the loss of diversity in their community. And as a result, we started thinking about more and more that affordable housing and the huge affordable housing demand that the service employees on the spine of Denver, the critical spine of Denver, create. The demand for affordable housing was critical. So next stop was CHFA and assembling a team that included David Cohen and our architect, John Gagnon, that started to focus on the historic, which was a difficult needle to thread. And soon discussions with Tracy and her staff, and very soon after that with Brad, to see if we didn't know exactly how we were going to do it. It's almost like snowboarding or skiing in the trees. You don't know exactly what your line is going to be, but you do know ultimately that you're going to get out and find that line. You may be carried out, you may walk out. Let's hope that you're riding out. It took perseverance and a goal to deal with some of these issues that we knew were critical, and a team and friends that we knew we could rely on to find our way out of the trees.
Right. So as integral to this project for the tax credits, anything different about the tax credits in this particular project? I know it took more than that, but the tax credits were the big part of making this thing work. And that can either go to you, David, or
John, do you want to address that?
Well, let me start just a little bit, and then David, you can color in the specifics for the Quail. So one of the great achievements from my perspective at CHFA was that David and his team were able to use a non-competitive 4% tax credit is how we call that. It means that it is a non-limited, it's not a competitive credit. The financing of the project must be completed at least in part, at least 50% of it, by private activity bond financing, which is the limiter, and that resource is becoming more scarce. Here, 2017, when the concept was coming forward to CHFA, it really is a wonderful opportunity, and I think David could speak more to this, when you don't have to compete for tax credits. If you can find a way to use non-competitive 4% credits and assemble the private activity bond cap, which in this case CHFA provided, it really allows a little bit more of a surety with the process. It doesn't in this case, the challenge of accessing acquisition credits because of it being an adaptive reuse or an acquisition and a rehab of an older structure really was a very significant challenge that they solved in a very unique way. So in that sense, this project represents almost sort of extra special affordable housing. It really was a very hard capital stack to put together, and also a timeline to achieve the different milestones that had to happen before certain deadlines. So I'll stop there on credits and we can go into those later.
Yeah, that's a good point. And John, I was just going to throw it to you because obviously all the groups had to be involved, not just the tax credits. And it's a good point to point out it was non-competitive and you knew what you had, and then you could assemble a team to help supplement that. So John, can you talk about more of the capital stack and what was needed? Because I know you had an integral part of that.
Yeah, so I worked with David to create this capital stack. Jayma, would you mind pulling that up? So it's probably easier to talk through this with the flow chart rather than trying to just describe it because it is pretty complicated. First time I showed this to CHFA and to Tracy at DURA, their heads were spinning, like, how can this work? So in any case, on the light tech, just back to the 4% for 1 second, is you can monetize those tax credits. But the other key with the 4% being non-competitive is you're not limited to the number of units you can build. If you use the 9%, you're maxed at 80 units. We knew we had to create more density on this project, and to get more density, we had to deliver smaller units. So it really was the first affordable micro unit project. And by micro, the average size, David, is about 390 square feet. Yeah, so, and that's for studios and 1 bedrooms, but we also had to sell it being the micro unit concept to gain the density to all of our partners. So we held tours at the turntable over by the stadium where they converted an old Holiday Inn motel into micro units. So I thought the best way to get everybody's head around what micro units look and feel like was to take that tour. And that was key into getting everybody on board. I think that, yeah, this is doable. We're not pushing people into closets and they're livable. The second piece of it is the bond that we use. It really delivers really low interest financing on that side of the debt, but the tax credits again create equity. So if you look through here, David's absolutely right. We went to the neighborhood first to hear what they wanted and needed in the neighborhood. Then we went to the city and then to DURA and to CHFA. We just kept making those rounds over and over again, because as you pull one lever, you're gonna upset the apple cart on the other side. So we struck a balance. David, it took us about a year and a half to get to the final solution, and then we were able to start closing soon thereafter. So if you look at the upper left, that's the light tech investor. So they're buying those tax credits to create the equity. Denver Office of Economic Development, the OED, which is now host for the housing piece of it, provided what's known as a performance loan, meaning as long as we deliver what we say we're going to deliver, there's no payments due, and then at the end of the day, we don't have to pay that debt off because it's forgiven so long as we meet 30-year covenant. We had a great commercial lender in First Bank. David's had a long relationship with them, but they saw the building and saw what we were trying to do. They were on the tour as well, and they jumped in and really helped us not only with the construction loan but bridge financing to get there. And then so we had to. Then you have DURA's participation on there as well, and we were able to monetize the tax increment financing award. So that created more equity into the project as well up front. And then also we use state and federal tax credits on this for historic preservation. I learned a lot about preservation. In fact, I've become passionate about preservation. You can make it work if you're diligent enough. But I now sit on the Historic Denver's board and helping private developers work through that. So it was a real learning experience. If we go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is how it starts developing once you jump from that high level and start getting into the different partnerships. To make this work with CHFA and so that we didn't create a tax event for our investors, we had to separate, and then to also comply with DURA's, for our application with DURA, we had to separate the commercial from the residential. And I think Kathryn alluded a little bit to boosting our basis on the tax credits with the acquisition through a couple of mechanisms. But really, we David and I had to work with all of these different partners and pull them all together and really flow chart who gets paid off when, who comes in when, and how the capital stack flows. So this one, David, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the capital stack on this was 7 layers deep. But you can see all the different partners that come in and out. And that doesn't include the first bank construction loan. If you go down to the next slide, I think there's 3 of them here. We have the exit strategy here. So this is when this is the final partnership and the way everybody gets paid off. So First Bank is being refinanced now. It's been has been open and stabilized for a few years now. So we're in the process of refinancing to permanent loans, and then we have to be cognizant of all the subordination agreements. And that was probably the hardest part of getting everybody to agree on the final subordination agreements with the city and the others. And then also the audience for tax credit investors is small, but then you tack on all the complexity of this deal that shrunk that audience even further. But having folks understand how LIHTC works is really, it was really the hard part with some of the market rate investors. But in any case, and then to top this off, we had a very patient owner in Michael Geller who funded the acquisition of the property. And he's still obviously a partner in the deal. But I think Michael's patience is what was key to making this thing happen. So hopefully I didn't make your head spin.
Yeah, thanks for confusing everyone, John. Just another easy deal.
Yeah.
No, but it just shows the complexities to pull something like this off and who all is involved. So thank you for touching on the capital stack. Tracy, talk about the importance of the project in the eyes of DURA. Obviously, we saw the photos and what the property was and the potential it had. So what was the thoughts of DURA getting into this?
Sure, thanks. So again, our role is to be that organization that can take a project that the private sector is wanting to undertake, but has financial challenges in making it happen, that is consistent with the broader goals and policy objectives of the city. So again, when you're looking at the Quail and what it was looking to deliver, from the adaptive reuse, the affordable housing, and the blight elimination, it fit really neatly into the place that DURA likes to be. As John mentioned a moment ago when he was going through the capital stack, this project from a community standpoint needed to be able to show that it met the criteria and the outcomes of the neighborhood plan, as well as the city comprehensive plan and Blueprint Denver. So we've talked a lot about the affordable housing component of this, but equally important to the community was that reactivation of the street level. So included in this project is 10,000 square feet of retail space, which was really important for DURA to be able to participate at all, because again, our tool is tax increment financing, and we are able through that tool to capture the newly generated property tax and sales tax that the project generates. One of the challenges that we run into when we are trying to work with affordable housing developers is the fact that affordable housing frequently doesn't generate much, if any, property tax, particularly if you have a building that was previously assessed commercial that is now going to residential. Won't get into all of the complexities of our tax structure, but at 29% or commercial assessment, taking it down to the 7, whatever it is now, there's an awful lot of value that has to be included in order for that to work. So when we were able to work with David and John and split out the pieces of the residential to the commercial, that actually allowed us to be a much more effective participant in the transaction. The lion's share of the tax increment that we are looking to commit to the project is in fact slated to come from the sales tax increment relative to the project, much more so than the property tax. One thing I wanted to mention, we should have touched on this before. When we first started working on this project and we refer to it as 101 Broadway, everybody just like, until we said, oh, it's the former El Diablo. With that, people completely understood. And there again was that desire to bring back what had been a really thriving retail experience along the corridor, in addition to the residential piece as well. And again, for the tool that we have, if it wasn't for the commercial space, our involvement would have been really limited and much more challenged.
Right. Okay. Yeah, they had a pretty good margarita there at the El Diablo. So it couldn't stay open because the building wasn't fit to be inhabited. Anyway, Kathryn, we've discussed from CHFA some of the tax credits and finance side. We saw John's flow chart. Anything you want to add to the involvement of CHFA that you hadn't already that was unique to this property?
That mute button is sticky. Okay. I think some of the things that really, we should focus on too is that, we really looked hard when this application came to CHFA at sort of the success of this size of unit and the marketability, livability of that. And John really talked about, due diligence to really help illustrate that. But it's not a common unit size to be around 400 square feet or just under when you look at the one bedrooms and the studios. So that was certainly something that CHFA looked at, thought about from a success rate with marketability, livability, and we feel really good about it. So I think that's very unique in this development, and also unique with the use of the tax credit program. That's not as common to see financing of smaller units like this. It's more typical to see standard size units. The other thing I think that was a really interesting achievement, again, and it was mentioned by Tracy earlier, is that the energy efficiency standard of this building is strong and it's LEED certified. So I think that was a real success that is part of CHFA's mission to see that supported, and certainly harder when you do an adaptive reuse. So I think that's another highlight that I would bring forward. And I think on the other side, just the issuing of the private activity bonds, it was a very complicated process. So I think the takeaway I'd like the audience to have is that while this is complicated and has so many benefits for the neighborhood, for Denver, for the residents, the street level space, commercial, this is almost, it's harder than a typical project. So we want more people to get in this game like Zocalo is doing, and more people to take on preservation. But you don't have to start with this. Maybe you start with a different, more traditional affordable housing, and then you move into this level of complexity.
Yeah. Hey, Terrance, if I can chime in. Tracy alluded to the entitlement process and the challenges we had. Initially, this project was designed with a 4-level parking garage. That would have added another $5 or $6 million to the project. And the project really couldn't afford it. But I dug into the zoning code with the zoning administrator at that time. And then we applied the landmark designation rules within the zoning code. And then we had to sell back to the neighbors and our partners at CHFA and DURA, and even I think Tracy had to carry our torch to the executive development committee at the city, that we were going to only provide surface parking. We could do that because we only had to provide parking to replace the parking that was taken by adding the second building on. And then that's the landmark exception. And then we also had to provide parking for the new retail side. So to sell 32 space parking, surface parking for 105 unit space plus retail, it was a hard sell going through the whole thing. And especially in the neighborhood where the neighbors have resident parking decals to be able to park on the street. So they were nervous about it, but I think, well, I know we're so close to the TOD site at at Broadway and Alameda, and then also both Lincoln and Broadway provide BRT lines, meaning frequently served bus lines, so people get back and forth every 15 minutes going either direction. And then having the fact that Zocalo designed they call it the Velo room, which is a bike storage and garage within the building. It even has, I don't know if we have any photos of that, but they even provide the tools. Well, there you go. They even provide the tools to keep your bicycles tuned up. But it was a big sell. And then the other part was convincing our partners at CHFA and the city that we were developing a project where 90% or more of the residents would be using public transportation, bicycles, and walking because of its location. We got through that, and then the neighborhood actually gave us a letter of support on moving forward without the parking structure. The other thing on the entitlement side is we had to go to the Board of Adjustment because our parking was detached from the parcel. So we had to get an exception to go across the alley, and had to give up a little bit of right of way. But even the Board of Adjustment, where they saw the goals of the project, what we wanted to deliver, we had a unanimous vote on approval for the variance to allow us for the detached parking. So the parking was a real challenge on this one, but we got through it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, two reoccurring themes here. When you got into this, micro units were not widely embraced like they were in cities like San Francisco, New York, and being underparked as well. So really being at the forefront, after Turntable to deliver on more functional micro units in an urban setting, it was a great feat in itself. And we've seen a lot of people come behind you and do the same thing with lower parking ratios and smaller units. Those are the trends going forward. Before we leave this topic of how your group worked on it, I'd love to hear from Brad and talk about the city support as well for this.
Yeah, sure. So again, I think it's important for everybody listening to take note, right, that in spite of really great tools and resources like tax credits and taxes and bonds, low interest financing from CHFA. David, what did you sell these credits for? Do you remember?
It was 82 cents, I believe, John, 83 cents.
Right, so that's pretty low, right? But even in spite of all that, in spite of the TIF loan from DURA, in spite of a partnership with the Denver Housing Authority that limited the property taxes the property has to pay, in spite of reducing the amount of parking and the unit sizes, right? There's still a need. In spite of all of those things, we still couldn't make the numbers work, right? And so, the city and county of Denver is aware of that, and we look at these kinds of projects and make sure that we can invest in the ones that we find important and work in partnership with CHFA on the underwriting. And so in this case, I believe it was a $2.5 million kind of fully subordinated loan. John described it earlier as kind of a performance loan, where as long as the property houses who it says it's going to house for no more than what they say they're going to charge in rent, then the loan eventually over time becomes forgiven. But it's a way for us to make sure that we also have a stake in kind of compliance and overseeing and ensuring that the outcomes that we're seeking in terms of quality, stable housing for lower income individuals and families is met on this site. And so we often play that role of kind of gap financing or coming in with kind of some of the last dollars to ensure that the economic feasibility of developments like these are there. And then because of that loan, have a stake in overseeing the compliance of it and ensuring that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's amazing. Look at the before and after photos of what a great execution this was, and looking at the complexities to pull this off just financially. That's one thing. David, what else was needed aside from everything just described to get this off the ground? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, there was so much. And just correcting, I sent this out. Kathryn recognized 91.5 cents, though, not 80 cents. So sorry for that mess.
That helps.
But recognize, I mean, this is the complexity that there were three sets of tax credits. The historic tax credit was valued at 80 cents. The low income housing tax credit was valued at 91.5 cents. State tax credit, historic tax credit, John, I think is 91, 92 cents on the dollar. And with John's help, we just secured that through the state's Office of Economic Development and International Trade. But what everybody is hearing here is that this is incredibly complicated stuff. I remember hearing Tony Salazar of McCormick Baron Salazar, one of the country's leading affordable housing developers, describe when he was in Denver, the DU Affordable Housing Conference, said that affordable housing isn't rocket science. It's harder than rocket science. His point is completely well taken. It's funny, as I'm watching all these slides, developers have a tendency to be very focused on the goal, and we finish and we've got a new goal. Looking at this makes me proud, not of what necessarily Zocalo has done, but what this group has done. And there were so many different groups that had to make a real commitment. But the challenge, going to your question, Terrance, the challenge is that, as we see, okay, typically there's equity, maybe there's LP equity and GP equity. There's a lender. There is an entitlement process, and you lasso all of those together, and sometimes they fight a little bit, but eventually everybody's aligned. The agencies, federal, state office of the State Housing Preservation Office, CHFA, 3 different agencies, including landmark preservation, which was really a sticky wicket to get through. Each of these was entirely motivated to get this project done, but they have a set of requirements that make them relatively unbending. So that you think about all of these agencies that had and lenders and equity, all of whom had different perspectives and different priorities. And it's to think about it as putting 25 raccoons in a pillow sack and thinking that they're going to get along. It's very, very difficult. It's very difficult to get this alignment. And so, as Kathryn was saying earlier, to the degree that we're able to have the elected officials say, this is really important. Affordable housing, whether it's Westminster, whether it's Denver, whether it's Granby, the elected officials need to make this a real commitment. And so that agency leaders from top to bottom know that affordable housing is a basic need, is a human right, and that there needs to be among staff an alignment so that the typical speed bumps or glass walls that we run into can be effectively overcome and opened. And so I've used the term to start with perseverance. It takes such perseverance. And one of the things that we had talked about as a group before is we at the same time we were planning and starting to execute on a $100 million, 357 unit project called Edit in River North. What we recognized is, and this is going to your question or your exclamation, Terrance, of why did we do it? As a developer that has a decent number of projects to pursue, when we think about the staff time, we estimate internally that we probably spent about 4 times the amount of staff time, let alone all the additional consultants that we brought in for this project. 4 times the amount of staff time for this relatively small $33 million project as compared to a project 3 times the size in terms of dollars and 3.5 times the size in terms of number of units. So that's, it is maybe like, I've never gone through childbirth myself, but I can imagine, as is said by women about childbirth, that the pain wears off and it's the afterglow of the love that you have for this child. And that's what we feel. This is a project that has had real community impact. Thanks to Tracy and to the neighborhood, we've focused on art, and with that focused to local art and local artists. 9.art was our consultants. The fact that we saved 1.4 million, almost $1.4 million in construction costs. A big chunk of that went back to commission local art. Really a focus that both Tracy and DURA and the neighborhood had us make. I'm proud to say that I think that this is Zocalo's most beautiful project. And that's not something that a developer will typically say about an affordable housing project.
That's really interesting, and show your passion shows, just so the audience knows. You know, David was one of the first into Union Station, you know, first out of this side of the '08 recession, and in downtown Lodo, Cherry Creek, Lowhigh. So you have some great projects, much larger, beautiful big glass, expensive buildings, and to hear that this ranks really at the top of you know, your successes as a developer just goes to show your passion. I want to throw this out to the panel. Tell us about any times throughout this process where you just thought this wasn't going to work and you're going to have to throw your hands up. And then what did you do to overcome those obstacles? I'll get to you, but just let's start with Tracy and hear it from the Urban Renewal Authority's perspective, and then we'll go to the.
So I'm laughing because when I was thinking about this, what immediately came to mind was the day that David and John walked in with their 3 pages of flowcharts and realized, oh my goodness, are we really going to be able to thread this needle to be able to make sure that all of the different requirements of all of the different financing sources actually could work together. And one of the things that that we experience when we're working with affordable housing developers is they'll have a conversation with each of the different financing sources and think that it all works together, only to then come to a meeting like with DURA and realize that no, the way that we would look to participate in a project is going to throw a real wrench into whether it's the basis calculation or how do you accept public dollars if it's not in the form of a loan without tripping other equity concerns. And so it was when we were looking at this flow chart and said, oh my goodness, I'm just not clear on how it is how it is we're going to make sure that the money goes to the commercial aspect when the real need is in the residential. But we were able to build a bridge that allowed us to do that. But yeah, looking at the flow charts and questioning, oh my goodness, are we really going to be able to pull it all together? But has been said before, where there's a will, there's a way, and we figured it out.
Yeah, Tracy, that flow chart can scare anybody, even with a high level of experience. How about you, Kathryn? Any time through the process where you looked at it and said, is it worth it to do this? Can we get it done? I know CHFA has done a lot of complex financings before.
Well, thanks, Terrance. And in full disclosure, I wasn't with CHFA at the time that this came through, so I'm looking backwards at, you know,
that person has since quit, right? Because after doing this,
no, he sailed off into a lovely retirement.
He did
but
throw
give a lot
up.
of check. It was Mike Pacheco who really was lead staff on this project. I don't know if I can say enough about the complexity of the financing, and I think we get really into the weeds, but there was some really smart thinking by Zocalo, and probably John, you were part of that, in terms of being able to find a way to boost the basis through acquisition credits. And there were some really complicated timeframes, and you see those partnerships not only on the perm financing side with the commercial condoed out, but you saw that on one of the first diagrams. And so that area, I think, was really rather unique with this project, but really probably pretty essential to be able to separate those ownerships, start construction, and then still have confidence that other investors would come in later. So I'll kind of stop with that and we can go into those weeds, but maybe John or
so
David.
While we have you, we did get a question from the audience just asking about explaining the new 4% floor rate. If you could touch on that briefly.
Sure. So that's a wonderful gift to the affordable housing industry and all partners here. So this was legislation by Congress in Washington right at the turn of the year, signed by President Trump. I think he signed it on a Sunday evening. So it was really kind of came out of nowhere, but it was a long sought legislative action to boost the power of this 4% credit. And essentially prior to that legislation, the APR would float and was often down at 3%. So we call it the 4% credit, but really it was more like 3% of your eligible basis. And so really this fix boosted instantly the value of this credit by 30%. And so it really made feasible many projects that previously had a huge gap. And so pricing is still being worked out because it's an instant flood of credit and we only have a limited number of investors, but we think that's more of a speed bump than a really long-term issue. So we've seen a little bit of a dip in the pricing. David mentioned that it was 91.5 cents for this project. Right now we're seeing pricing maybe dip into the high 80s in the Denver area, but I think a lot of areas are very strong and we'll see back into the low 90s, even mid 90s if there's Community Reinvestment Act requirements by the investors. So the fix really brings forward just in and of itself financial feasibility for many more 4% projects that are financed with private activity bonds.
Right. All right, John. So you were a bit of the mad scientist behind the flow chart. Was there any time there where there was something thrown in front of you that you didn't think you could overcome?
Oh, first of all, no, actually, first of all, when you work with David Zucker shoulder to shoulder, like I did for several years on this project, his passion is contagious. So I don't think either one of us ever gave up. We kept trying to think outside the box. At 5 a.m. phone calls, 10 p.m. calls, dinners, you name it. We were shoulder to shoulder on this from start to finish. He'd have a question, I'd go find the answer. I had a question, he'd find the answer. So we were bobbing and weaving through this whole project, but I don't think David nor I ever gave up and thought we'd throw in the towel. I knew there was a way to make it work, and I think together with David, we pulled that together. But Tracy's right. Every time we thought we had something that we could get done, one of our partners on the public side, well, you can't do that because of this reg or that reg or statute. So we, and that was with me having run, the federal dollars and state dollars to the Office of Economic Development for 5 years. So I was responsible for all the tax credits and loans there. And I think I had an edge on keeping this one together because of that role that I served the city. And I had to do, and when I first started there, the default rate on the loan portfolio was at nearly 20%. And Tracy was instrumental in helping us figure all this stuff out. But we wrote underwriting policy and the first housing plan Denver had seen in over 20 years, thanks to Mayor Hancock. But we got, just having all that background and knowledge, I had the relationships where I could call Tracy and say, what do you think about this or that? So that was the advantage we had on this project. I don't think it would have happened otherwise. And so my role in this really was public affairs, both with the community, the electeds, and senior staff at all the agencies. The entitlement process was the most frustrating, I think, just because we're walking into a structure that had been condemned. The prior owner had done everything from removing trusses, and he was poking holes through walls and to expand a kitchen, all without permitting. And so we had to get through that just to get to a structural. We couldn't even start repairing the structure until we jumped through a lot of hurdles there. But in the end, we had really good partners at the city and the building department, zoning department, and then also with the state. The gentleman who runs his History Colorado for the state tax credits, he was picking up the phone. He'd have an idea and he'd give me a call and say, what do you think about this? And then we also, the genius behind the underwriting on this was SB Clark. We should give them a shout out because I can stitch the pieces together, but the folks who can actually sit down and make the numbers work is that group. They do, I think 90% of their business is public finance. And so that was another consultant we had to bring in to make sure all this stuff balanced and David and I could sell it to the investors. But it was, again, every time something would come up, David and I would hop in the car and we'd have to go sell it again to either the neighborhoods or city officials. But we got there. But I don't think either one of us ever thought it was too much and we're ready to walk away.
Yeah, and we're getting a load of questions from the audience, and just I'll stay with you, John. Please elaborate on the entitlement timelines to secure the credits. Is that 12 months, longer?
David, do you recall on this one? This one took a little bit longer because we were trying to get the basis boosted by the acquisition.
Yeah, there were so many things we had to step through, but and Kathryn can describe the typical process. I think that it's safe to say, because of the non-competitive 4% rather than 9% that we were going after. And again, Kathryn can talk more about this, but John is pointing to a really important thing, which is an ability to communicate. So often developers and those that control entitlement feel as if there's a Chinese wall between them. And that is really difficult to communicate around. We had really easy access because, again, everybody recognized the importance of the outcome of this project. So there to the question, when did we know? But there was a kind of nodding of heads. I hope I'm not, because it's non-competitive, Kathryn, I think that I can probably say this. I think there was generally nodding of heads that, yeah, this is a really important project for the city. I think the city had been in touch with John's help with CHFA, so that there was a recognition that, yeah, it's complicated, but the city's support, and recognizes before, Brad, your time there, the city's support was there. And so therefore, I think it was probably a matter to the question of how long. It was probably really the first meeting where, look, if the market study works out and the cost analysis works out and the numbers make sense, then yeah, there's a project that CHFA should be involved in. So I think that was really just a matter of months. To extend on that on the question, the single most challenging part of this process was historic, and the fact that we had to go through 3 different levels and then through the maw of fire and typical building permit as well. So in some ways, there were 5 agencies all dealing with historic and the building itself. So landmark preservation was, John, I think the better part, or actually maybe over a year. Then we had to go to SHPO, the State Housing Preservation Office. Then we had to go to federal through the Parks, National Park Service. Then we had to go through Denver. We tried to move concurrently through as many of these as we could, but it was really, really tough because any one of those, landmark preservation, had such a strong grip. And planning didn't really want to look at plans until landmark preservation. But this was all under, as John was describing, there was an extreme hardship in that the structure had been so degraded that with one big snow, the city's engineer and our own engineer, 2 different of our own engineers, felt that with a large snow event, the building would collapse. And fortunately for us, we had 2 moderate snow years, but it was a race. I mean, there was truly a dangling sword over our heads. So it was a much longer entitlement process than typical had this just been a market rate new construction project. But the complexity, the several burning rings of none of which were aligned, it seemed, of historic really slowed us down from the start.
Yeah, historic put it at jeopardy with the cost of the project as well, because that lag on the timeline affected all the bids we had from contractors. So we had smaller contractors who could work on preservation projects, threatening to walk or increase their prices. So then we had to go back and make sure we had kept renegotiating those contracts for all the subs. So there's a lot of moving parts on this one, but the entitlement process for the historic was the toughest.
Yeah. Brad, anything to add from the city's perspective on challenge?
Again, like Kathryn, I wasn't individually involved in it, but despite the fact that the city, provided the partnership a forgivable loan, which in many ways operates, like a grant, I can assure you that David and John, had they been able to do it without the city's involvement as a lender, they would have. And that's not necessarily a knock on my entity, but it's just that it adds layers of complication. There are more legal agreements, more intersubordination and intercreditor agreements, and it's another process. And every time we pull a lever, it affects something on DURA's side or CHFA's side or David's side. And so it's, that less is more with development if you can. And so it's not because David wanted to put together 7 different sources. He needed to in order to make this thing work. And so I think that's true for all of our agencies across the board.
Yeah, I would jump in and say that unfortunately, all of us on the public side want to be the last dollars in. So trying to figure out how we navigate that to make sure that each of our organizations are able to demonstrate that the developer has pushed as hard as they can on other sources to allow us to say, yep, we were the last dollars in is a little tricky.
But Brett, so Rick Padilla gave us when he was in housing, gave us an early letter of conditional commitment on it. That went miles in getting CHFA and DURA and everybody else on board because they knew this was a priority project for the city. So I think as you go through putting these together, understanding which early commitment makes the most sense for the rest of your capital stack is key. And the city coming in early was helpful with the rest of the stack.
Right. Okay. Well, all that's great. One last question here. So every deal you usually do, you learn something. But when you do something this complex, I'm sure you learn a lot. Overall, I'd like just to touch on each of you. What are lessons learned from the Quail? I'll start with you, David.
I would, we think about 4,200 units, Kathryn, if you nod your head, 4,200 units that the CHFA typically is involved in annually because of construction costs increasing, which we know are for the last 10, 12, 14, 15 years, about 10, 11% annually. Incomes have not kept up. What we know is that CHFA, HUD, Bureau of Labor Statistics incomes have been increasing over the last 15 years at somewhere just under 2% annually. So when the goalposts of construction costs are moving away so rapidly from those that are kicking the ball at the football at 1.8% over 15 years for increase of salaries, incomes, it's a real challenge. And so I guess as a policy question, or just recognizing, first of all, the monumental challenge that today the state, if I remember the statistics, the city of Denver needs somewhere around 30, 35, 40,000 units of affordable housing just for demand that exists today. Throughout the state, Kathryn, that I would imagine is probably 3 times that, 100,000 units. And then if I remember from Kathryn, our time together at the state, the Division of Housing, to augment the amount of housing that would be needed in the future is probably 3 or 4 times, maybe 5 times what we're actually able to produce. So as a policy question, so sorry to respond with a question to a question, Terrance, but as a policy question, what are those things that each of us think may be beneficial when it comes to augmenting the amount of affordable housing? And I would offer, well, I won't go first, but maybe putting this over to Kathryn first. If you think about the things that CHFA wishes in a magic wand that CHFA could wave, what are those things that which includes construction costs. What are those things that that CHFA would like to be able to do to increase significantly the amount of affordable housing delivered in the state?
Well, there you go.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. Well, it's the million-dollar question in some ways, and it's a challenge that we've all been working on for many careers, my own and all those before me and those ahead of me. I think there's a couple answers. We need more action legislatively from Congress, at the national level. We received that gift at the end of the year of the 4% rate fix or minimum, 4% rate minimum. And I think working on sort of the private activity bond and maybe looking at that 50% test, maybe we can wiggle around with that, even allowing, it may be a lower test, allowing for recycling of bonds. These are all ways, and it's a toolbox. It's not a single approach to this challenge of affordable housing. I think that we've got some great partners, certainly in our more urban areas of the state, Denver particularly, where land banking is a real key to be able to ensure success. It really takes a long time, as we've illustrated, to assemble everything and bring the project to fruition. Meanwhile, land is scarce. So we've got some good partners working on that aspect of projects. Brad, I hope when you get your chance here, you can really talk about the additional resources that are coming from the voters, and then speed of deployment of those resources. I think one of the things that haven't focused on so much with the Quail, but I'd like to illustrate, is that this really sort of is a workforce type of need. So we have needs all the way up beyond just what the Quail hits, even higher incomes that cannot make it in the Denver market. But we have a need to serve our workers, our critical workers, so we have success with economic growth. But many of our resources, target those who are most rent burdened. So folks who are at the lowest level of an income spectrum. So we have challenges that are growing across such a large spectrum that we need more tools to do that. I think that 4,200 is a good number, David, for general tax credit annual numbers of supported units. I think, though, that 4% is going to give us a really different number this year. So I think we're going to see a spike. So I'm really pleased about that. And I think the last thing I'll maybe put out there is just greater coordination. We need to support our developers. We need to make it easy for them from a political standpoint. We need to align, CHFA needs to align stronger with Denver, other funding partners, just so that it's easier on that entitlement coming through certainty side, because we all have that same goal of greater production, smarter production, beautiful long-term sustainable housing, energy efficiency. So we're all working at this same challenge, and it just takes growing communication. And I think we're going down that road. It is a real hard thing, and Tracy, inviting you into the story even more. We're all in this looking at different ways that the toolbox can be made more robust.
Thank you. So it looks like we've gone from a question of, what are lessons learned, and David established that one of the lessons learned is just, a greater understanding of the need of affordable housing. So I will blend that question to the other panelists. What were the lessons learned from the Quail? And then what, we know the many challenges of affordable housing, and there's no simple solution. When you're pulling off something incredible as this, what else do you need to help fuel affordable housing, just much like Kathryn and David mentioned? So I'll throw it to you, Tracy. What were your lessons learned here? And then, opine a bit on just affordable housing, what we need to make it more prevalent.
So I think one of the lessons that we actually learned on an earlier project, which again is that challenged intersection between the rules and application of tax increment financing against the rules and regulations of low-income housing tax credits. I can't tell you how many times we think we had it done, only to then have the attorneys representing the tax credit investor review the redevelopment agreement and mark it all up and say, no, this doesn't work. And so again, taking what we had learned on prior projects and being able to introduce that concern early in this process, I think was really important. what is striking to me in this conversation is everybody is talking about how important delivery of affordable housing is, how it is such a high and pretty clear consensus on the policy need for it, and yet we make it so damned hard. So trying to really ask each of ourselves, whether it's at the local level, the state level, the federal level, if we truly believe, which I think we do, that this is such an important policy agenda item, what can we do to take the tools that we have? Even before we think about new tools, let's take the tools that we have and see if there aren't ways for us to align them more directly in order to make it so that we haven't scared away that potential affordable housing developer by just walking through all of the headaches that they can provide to really make it a much more attractive component of the overall development and redevelopment scene in Denver and elsewhere.
Great, thanks. I'll throw it over to you, Brad, and we'll finish up with John on the same questions. I don't know if any lessons learned from the city on the Quail, and then talk about affordable housing and what the city thinks we need to do to help increase that.
Yeah, sure. So the low-income housing tax credit program is a phenomenal program responsible for 90+% of the affordable housing that's been built nationwide in the last 30+ years now. And there are fixes that need to be made. Kathryn talked about it, but the reality, and frankly, CHFA is as thoughtful and creative and innovative and allocator of those resources as we have in this country. We're lucky to have them here. But the reality is they could double the amount of production that they're doing. I think that's a laudable goal, and one that I know Kathryn and her team are working on. And we still wouldn't be enough to overcome the monumental challenges that we have. And so, Tracy's absolutely right. But we have to, in addition to maximizing the programs that we have to think outside of kind of the LIHTC box, which is a very restrictive box still, to think through how can we broaden the scope and scale of the resources that we're putting into to solve this seemingly insurmountable challenge, right? So how do we move at the speed of market? How do we become more nimble and creative as the world of economy and development continue to grow at an unbelievable pace here in Denver? I mean, the Quail is an amazing story and one that we should celebrate and laud and look back on. But the problem is the story itself. These things are all sagas in and of themselves, and it takes too many people hours, too many time, too many agreements, too many resources to produce 100 units in a critically important place. We need thousands and thousands of units. So how do we work with market rate developers to incorporate affordable housing? What tools, both policy and resources, carrots and sticks, incentives and rules do we need to kind of continue to put in place? And I know we're actively thinking about all those things at the city and county of Denver, and our peers next door to us and throughout the state are thinking of that as well. But it's a big challenge that all of us industry wide, I think, need to work on and continue to be creative about moving forward, because the tools we have are great, but they're not enough.
Yep. Well said, Brad. Thank you. John, how about you? How do you simplify that flow chart a little bit, and what lessons learned?
Yeah, Tracy alluded to it, but I think we've got good product out there to work with. But I think, by talking through how they've had to stitch it together and how each program affects the other program, it shouldn't be that way. Because, if we had the tools we currently have worked well together, we probably would have saved ourselves a year in this whole process to get it there. And it wouldn't scare more developers away from even touching affordable housing. As far as the need goes, we can touch that 60 to 80% and below with different governmental programs, but we're really missing. I would hate to coin the phrase "missing middle," but that's critical. When I was at the office of economic development, I had 300 employees, and I know at least those who work close to me in the web building, we had quite a few of them driving from Fort Collins or Greeley down into Denver because even Loveland was too expensive for them. So they were using that van to go program, and they'd carpool back and forth every day. But I couldn't imagine driving an hour each way to work every day. And it's just not right. So addressing the workforce housing need, as Kathryn spoke about, is critical, and expanding those programs to go a little bit higher, because then once you start the economy, it's easier, and it really is an economic conversation that Brad alluded to on providing housing for the our critical workforce. They can't afford to live close to work. A lot of them are going to find another place to go to. But what I learned from this project though is it was the communication, and then building really close relationships once you sold the goal of the project and stuck to those goals. Everybody was willing to help across the board. Mike Pacheco at CHFA was key into helping me think outside the box, but I thought I knew the regs, but this guy could sleep and recite them at the same time. But having his help, Tracy Huggins' help at DURA, having me say, look at it this way when we're talking about the parking structure and what that was going to bring. But and then Brad's predecessors with the city, them coming in early, liking the project, and then helping us figure it out. The problem with all these different buckets, though, is they don't work well together. Well, they work together if you know how to put them together, but they don't work seamlessly together. And I think if we could figure that part out of it, we'd be able to produce more units and then increase the AMI level that we're trying to solve. I know at the state legislature that opens today, the Realtor Association is taken through an entire housing package that looks like it's going to be able to make it across the finish line. It's got a bunch of new programs, but I just stop and let's fix what we have rather than throw more at it and then make it even more complex. So we need more additional funds, but we also need the programs to work better together.
Right. Okay. Well, we do have some audience questions, but David, real quick, any other observations on just affordable housing in general? I think you're on mute.
Really fast, I would offer this one observation that with as many renters throughout the country that are cost burdened, the single biggest thing, if there were a wand to wave to fix, would be construction costs. 65% of the cost of an affordable housing project is and increasing is hard cost. The fact that the United States, since 1960, the efficiency of construction has only increased by somewhere around 1% from 1960 to today, so over 60 years, only 1%. Whereas agriculture and natural gas and furniture and computer have been 15 times more efficient. Imagine if we could, in fact, roll back the costs and do so because the government is investing, as the private market is, like Katera, and figuring out how to produce greater efficiency through modularization, panelization, and the miracle of offsite construction that every other industry takes for granted. Putting that much money back into the economy by those cost burdened people, if they're today at 50% and they're back at 30%, which is comfortable, imagine that additional economic boost, that all of that saved rent because the government was focused on creating efficiency in construction, which takes a lot of work in order to at state and federal and local levels. But it's something that I think is a necessity.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a great point, David. So go on to audience questions here. Here's one for Tracy. Tracy, the audience member asked, what, if any, impacts might COVID have on TIF structures in the future?
If someone can answer the question, what the impact of COVID is going to have on development, then I'll know the answer more directly. Because again, we are helping to advance the development that the private sector is already looking to undertake. So we don't see that the tool itself is going to be impacted as a result of COVID. It's just instead the way that the tool can actually be utilized, which needs to make sure that there is a constant pipeline of development coming through in order to allow us to help be supportive of those specific developments.
Great. Another audience question here, and I know we need to wrap soon, so this could be the last one. It's for David. Does the complexity of the capital stack, 7 layers, so it looks like in this case, if you can follow the chart, impact the exit strategy for a low-income housing developer?
Yeah, of course it does. And first of all, John mentioned this is a 30-year commitment to affordability. So yeah, if we were to sell today, the universe of prospective buyers is tiny. So it as John's used the term with our investor partner, Michael Geller, he's very patient. It takes patient cash. This is not something that's going to be in and out.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so Sarah, I don't know if you're on the line. How do we look on time? Is that it? I think we've answered all the audience questions for the most part, and got a lot of information out of this great panel. And I'll throw it back to you. But first off, I want to thank the panelists and just say from our chair, we admire what was accomplished here, although you faced a lot of headwinds to the process. Great addition to the city, well executed, all of you, and thank you for your time.
Great. Terrance, thank you so much. And again, to echo Terrance's thank you. We're so appreciative on behalf of NAIOP to have this panel with us here today. I would also like to acknowledge today's program sponsors one more time: Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, Newmark, Alcorn Construction, Interior Environments, and Zocalo. I would like to encourage attendees to complete the post-webinar survey. You'll get an email here shortly. And a video of today's presentation will be available on the NAIOP YouTube page later this week. I do want to mention that this was our 5th virtual tour and case study featuring the 5 project award winners from the 2020 NAIOP Awards program. We will resume this series coming up here in April after the development honorees have been named at the NAIOP Awards of Achievement, which will take place on March 10th. So make sure to visit the NAIOP website for more details on that series. Thanks again for joining us today, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.